September 11th, 2001. The very day of the deadly attacks in the United States, Al-Qaeda is already planning its next spectacular attack. One of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's recruits arrives in Hong Kong. The man checking into a hotel that night is a 20-year-old Canadian of Kuwaiti descent. His name, Mansour Jabara. His mission, finalizing Al-Qaeda's next terror campaign, this time in Southeast Asia. Jabara's instructions were to unleash mayhem in the region with a wave of bombings against Western targets. Next stop, the city-state of Singapore. Jabara would arrive there in December 2001 to organize the terrorist plot and scope out targets. Not an easy task in a place that prides itself on its multicultural harmony. Hindus, Buddhists, and Muslims live side by side. But even in this prosperous city-state, Al-Qaeda was able to build a local cell, a surprise to many.
The Muslims in the region in Southeast Asia are by and large a peace-loving people, and they still are. And the speed at which the foreign militant agenda could be introduced into the region surprised us.
This is video Jabara shot as he scouted his targets. It was later found in the possession of one of the local cell members, and it clearly shows one of the targets, the U.S. Embassy. The terrorist carefully scoped out where the bombs would be placed. The plan would involve 7 truck bombs, using 10 times the amount of explosives used in the Oklahoma City bombing of 1995. The attack never happened because the Singaporean government was tipped off.
As a result of this, we were able to gather enough information to mount an operation.
Singaporean authorities moved quickly. They found ordinary people in ordinary places. Few of the cell members were known to be Muslim radicals. They held down unexceptional jobs. They were businessmen, janitors, cab drivers.
The strange thing is a lot of these people, even their own family didn't know what they were doing. It was such a closely guarded secret. A lot of their friends have been taken by surprise.
These are the mugshots of the Singapore cell members arrested in December 2001. Altogether, 31 suspected operatives. Jabara himself, Al-Qaeda's point man for the operation, would be arrested in March 2002. Documents reveal other targets of the Singapore plot: pipelines, other embassies, and U.S. warships. Zachary Abuza has written a book about the terror network in Southeast Asia.
These are sketches that they took when targets they were reconnaissing. This is the most interesting of the documents. This shows what all of the subgroups were responsible for targeting and the times that they were operating when they were going out on reconnaissance missions, different instructions they were given to do, the locations, different places they were going to look for targets, and indeed the target list that they came up with.
What does it say about how Al-Qaeda is reorganizing itself?
I think since September 11th, and especially since the fall of Afghanistan, they're a more formidable adversary. They'll never have a single state like Afghanistan to operate out of. Therefore, they're relying much more on groups and alliances with individuals, that many of which go back to the 1980s in Afghanistan.
These alliances have helped Al-Qaeda build terror partnerships all over the world. Perhaps the best example is found in another part of Southeast Asia, Indonesia, where Al-Qaeda has linked up with a militant Islamist group, Jemaah Islamiyah, led by radical cleric Abu Bashir and a longtime bin Laden associate known as Hambali. A country of more than 200 million people with the world's largest Muslim population, Indonesia has long prided itself on being a moderate Muslim country, tolerating its religious minorities, Christians and Hindus. The nation prospered during the 80s and 90s, but when the economy collapsed in the late 90s, Islamic extremist organizations found new recruits.
Indonesia alone has some 40 million unemployed people right now. Even if a fraction of those people become radicalized, that's a very sizable pool for them to draw on.
We drove out into the countryside to check out one of Indonesia's thousands of Islamic religious schools, often the only form of education for Indonesians. At this school, education does not extend much past rote learning of the Quran. The school itself teaches a tolerant form of Islam. But even here, bin Laden's ideas resonate.
They look up to Osama because of his dedication to Islam. That's the first reason. Secondly, because of the actions of Osama bin Laden.
The Imam teaches his pupils that jihad is not about fighting wars, but is about struggling to make oneself a better person. However, a small minority of such schools teach a violent jihadist form of Islam. And in the far corners of this nation of 13,000 islands, government officials say it is difficult to monitor budding Islamic radicals.
We have a very big territory. We have a very wide jungle, for example, tropical jungle. And meanwhile that our police, our army is lack of equipment. We cannot control the whole territory effectively.
To make matters worse, tensions between Muslim and Christians have flared up into violence in recent years. And until recently, according to the former U.S. ambassador to Indonesia, the government has been reluctant to crack down on the militant groups behind the violence.
It's quite clear that some senior military officials and politicians were very sympathetic to some of the extremist Islamic organizations. There were elements in the military who clearly were providing protection, support, even material support to some of these organizations. Not necessarily Al-Qaeda, but to some of the indigenous Indonesian extremist organizations.
These extremist organizations meant opportunity for Al-Qaeda. One of the loudest radical voices, Abu Bakr Bashir, the spiritual leader of Jemaah Islamiyah. His organization would become Al-Qaeda's partner in the region.
They spent 5 or 6 years putting together a regional network of supporters, of training camps, financial network. They recruited, they set up madrasas in all the countries as bases for their recruiting.
This is a Jemaah Islamiyah recruitment tape showing one of its military training camps.
People were given 4-month training, often involving religious indoctrination as well as combat training, how to make bombs, how to put weapons together, how to undertake guerrilla attacks. These people have now come home from military experience with no place to go, and they're primed to be ready to undertake attacks. They've got the connections, the cell structure, and so on to do this.
In the late 1990s, Jemaah Islamiyah's terror apparatus spread rapidly throughout Southeast Asia to Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines.
And so by 2000, they were technologically capable of putting together operations against targets. And by 2001, they were able to put together major operations that would target the United States and the symbols of American power.
Coming up next, soft targets, Al-Qaeda's new strategy to attack Westerners, and a new hiding place, Bangladesh.